Hi there, I'm Professor Richard Ray. I want to talk with you a little bit about evaluating training. I'm going to use a few things that are very familiar to those in the training and evaluation industry. The Kirkpatrick model, the ADDIE model, and the Phillips ROI model. If you're interested in finding out a little bit about me, you can stop your video now and read. Otherwise, when we think about training development, oftentimes we just focus on, hey, did I like that training? Or, hey, will they like that training? We focus on the like piece, but we don't typically gather data that helps us understand whether or not, one, the training was effective, two, whether or not the training was provided some satisfactory emotion or response, and three, will it change the way that we do business? Will there be impact? And so I'm briefly going to discuss these different models, Kirkpatrick, ADDIE, and Phillips ROI, and hopefully it'll give you a better understanding of what it is you want to evaluate when you go forward. When we think about how people deliver training, Figure 12 shows that we still have people who use different training methods. So somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100% of organizations use some type of instructor-led instruction. Somewhere around 70–75% use the internet in some way. Multimedia, about 65% use that. Believe it or not, there are people still out there using videotapes for training or CD-ROMs. And then some people are still using paper-based correspondence as a way to train, which just imagine what that looks like. The trend, however, with artificial intelligence and with other methods will be to use some type of technology to drive your learning and development. So who evaluates training? Only about 59% of those in the Fortune 500 said that they actually had some way, or I should say 59 to 60% said that they didn't have any way to measure whether or not the training was effective. They were able to measure the reaction at the reaction level, and we'll talk about those here in a moment. There were some who actually measured learning, and then there were some who tried to measure whether or not performance changed or whether behavior changed. And less than 30% we're actually looking at some type of cost-benefit analysis or return on investment. So if I spend $500,000 on this training project, what is my expected benefit, or what is the respective return on that $500,000 investment? Well, what do we evaluate, and how do we evaluate it? Well, evaluation is simply just trying to identify, was the time, energy, resources worth what I put into it? When decision makers make a decision, when leaders make a decision to purchase training or invest in training, what is their expectation that training is going to bring to their workforce? So often people will look to evaluate the progress of the learner, the impact of the learner, how well did they use it, and how much did they learn, the efficiency, including was this not only effective training, but did it improve? Did it get to a point where we had improvement, and whatever it was they were trained on, are they doing that better now than before? Steps to developing an evaluation program. Typically, you want to determine what your philosophy is. Some people will invest in things where there hasn't been a significant amount of research or evidence showing the value. For instance, I think we all want a more inclusive workplace. We talk about diversity and inclusion, belonging. We talk about welcoming cultures. But if you look at the general research behind it, not all of those things have a positive research, or either people haven't collected information on the positive research, but they know it's the right thing to do. So our philosophy may not be to develop or to measure it, our philosophy may be no matter what the return, we think this is important, so let's do it. Another thing you want to do is make sure that you have benchmarks that align to your purpose and philosophy, that fit within your framework. And then once you define what those benchmarks are, for instance, I'm going to implement a new program about including people with disabilities in the workplace. Our philosophy is it's important, we're going to do it because we think it's the right thing to do. But we're also going to develop some frameworks and just kind of do a check-in every 3 to 6 months, or we might be more prescriptive and say once a year we're going to evaluate each department and see how well this training is working to help managers develop more inclusive workplaces as it relates to people with intellectual disabilities. So once I develop that as my benchmark, I now have to develop instruments to measure learner reactions, to see if there's a change between state A, the current state, and state B, the future state. So is there a way for me to pre-test and post-test that to see if there was some type of training or knowledge, success or knowledge acquisition? And eventually I'm going to get to a point where I actually develop a plan for analyzing any training or any evaluation I do, and it should fit into my management plan. So as we develop that evaluation plan, we have to think, what is it we're measuring? And whether you're talking about training and development courses, or whether you're talking about customer service, or even program effectiveness of this product, you can measure a number of ways. You can measure the activity. Typically we do that as a count. We count something. We can measure efficiency. What's the quality? We can measure outcomes, the impact of it. We can measure program aims, the general desire that you're trying to, or the general issue you're trying to address. We can measure policy that we create around what that program aim is. And then, of course, we can measure organizations from a lot of different perspectives, both from an individual, organizational, department, unit, etc. I would say that when you look at these evaluation measures, probably the most important two to me are measures of efficiency and measures of outcome. For instance, I can measure the number of people in the classroom. Let's say there's 40 people in the classroom. I measured that. That's a number. I'm not sure that tells me anything. But if I want to measure the efficiency by which the professor delivers the content, or the efficiency by which the students acquire new knowledge based on it, that's meaningful. If I'm trying to measure the outcome, so what did they get out of this class? What did they get out of their learning experience? That's valuable to me. So when we think about it, we have to think about what type of data we're going to collect. So we can collect learner data. How well did the learner learn, and how well does the learner think he or she learned? We can measure learner achievement, so we could actually give them a test and say, okay, this is what you actually learned, not just how you felt about the training, but what actually transpired. You can also look at job performance. So you had to leave your office for a week to go to a training on Lean Six Sigma. Now, are you able to apply Lean Six Sigma? And then you can also measure organizational or unit things like the manager reaction to the training. Do I feel that this training helped Joe or Sue be a more productive quality assurance person? And then how do I know that? Well, now I'm collecting data around productivity. It's why we collect and where we get the data. So what else do we need to know? Well, we need to know how you're going to actually physically collect the data. You can collect it by observing the supervisors or the subordinates. You can collect data by sending out surveys, interviews. You can do focus groups. You can do quantitative and qualitative things. You can also get the people to tell you how they think the learning impacted them or their team. You can have them submit that in a number of ways. You can use emails, you can use text, you can use any other way of getting the information. And so now that we know what we can observe and how to collect the data, let's look at some of the techniques that people use to evaluate. We got self-analysis, document analysis, data mining. Most of those things are going to be in archival data. There's going to be data that already exists or it's easy for you to collect. You can also look at supervisor ratings of their employee post-training and pre-training and look at the difference. You can do intergroups and focus groups with people. You can survey and set up questionnaires, or you can go through the process of ROI. Now, here's the thing. If you start at the very tip top, self-analysis, system analysis, that's usually the cheapest way, less expensive way to gather information. But when you start looking down here, as you go down the line, it gets more and more expensive to collect data using these tools. And you may even get to a point where you say, I don't know if I need to spend that much money collecting. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about ROI. So most of the things we've talked about are short-term ways. There are other ways to collect information or to evaluate training or programs over time that are more long-term. And again, when you say long-term, you also should say more expensive. It can be post-training surveys. So I'm going to send you to training. I'm going to get an immediate response. But in 3 months, I'm going to send out another survey. And then a year from now, I'm going to send out another survey. I'm continuing to gather this information. You can also do a number of assessments where you look at other parts of their job to see how that training is impacted. So there may be assessments that already exist. You can also look at other non-training specific metrics to see what the impact was. Again, we talked about Lean Six Sigma. So if I train a certain percentage of people in my organization to eliminate waste and better organize processes to be more efficient, I should be able to measure those processes, and I should be able to measure things like scrap and rework and errors, and I should be able to measure what the impact of that training was, even though I'm not measuring the training itself. Probably the most expensive way to evaluate is time series studies, and this is essentially where you're looking at benchmarks before and after the training. You're also looking at a broad group of measures, and you're trying to create a more rigorous way to think about how you train and develop. And again, when you say rigor, you should also say expense. There's been a lot of ways to collect data. We're seeing more and more people use web-based surveys to collect data about the effectiveness of training. And that is because it's faster, it's standardized. You get the benefit of having machine learning and computer-aided tools to help you analyze the data you're collecting. And you can reach a larger number of respondents. Probably the most significant change we're going to see in the next few years is just how artificial intelligence will be leveraged to gather information about the effectiveness of training and then help managers and instructional designers get better at developing new training and making sure it's more effective. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Kirkpatrick method. There's a 4-level approach and a 5-level approach. We'll discuss those. The 4 levels more tried and true, and if you've studied adult learning or even pedagogical learning over the past 4 decades, you've been introduced to Kirkpatrick. If you've not, here's your brief introduction. It's the most common framework for evaluating. There's 4 levels. And in order to evaluate, you don't have to use all 4 levels, but the more levels you use in your evaluation, the more likely you are to get a more comprehensive evaluation. So there's 4 levels starting at the bottom. So this is reaction, learning, behavior, and result. So level 1, I'm trying to understand what the trainee's reaction to it was. Sometimes we talk about these as smile sheets. Sometimes we talk about these as just basic comfort with training. The second level is learning, and at this point we're trying to figure out, was there actually learning? And typically people will provide you a pre-test to measure your competency or your knowledge, and then they'll provide you a post-test where they measure what the change was, and then they call that change learning. That's a higher level. We move into level 3, and this, again, it's like with other things. The more you do, the more expensive it is, but also the more information you have about how effective the training is. So now we're looking at behavior. So I might send you to a class on Lean Six Sigma again, and you might like it. The food was good, the room was the right temperature, the chairs were comfortable. That's level 1. Level 2, wow, I now can do a sorting activity where I sort out waste, and or I can do a measurement activity, or I can do a simple voice of the customer modeling, and I can tell you what the steps are because I've learned. But as we move into that level 3, the behavior piece, now you're saying, okay, what behaviors have changed because the student has been through a Lean Six Sigma course? In that case, what you're looking at is, did the student perform better? Did they do something quicker? Did they eliminate waste and do something with that? So again, you have to observe it, you have to measure it in a very different way. And typically you're measuring it in the workplace. The first 2 levels, 1 and 2, can happen in the classroom. Level 3, you can measure it in simulations, but most organizations will measure it by having someone observe or measure the person new skills. And then the last level in Kirkpatrick's model is around result. Did our organizational model change? Did our performance improve? Did our profits increase? Did we recruit better people? Do we manage waste? Do we plan better because a person went through Lean Sigma training? So if we think about the evaluation methods at each level, reactions, again, these are questionnaires. It could be scorecards. It could be anecdotal. Most people, we call these smile sheets. So what's my initial reaction? Level 2, when you're trying to measure did learning occur, again, most people will use tests, or they'll use commitment logs. They might use journaling. They can use other ways of trying to really measure what transpired as a result of the training. Did behavior change? Typically, you'll see scorecards like organizational scorecards or unit scorecards. And then you can, again, measure, you can evaluate it by having a coach or a mentor or a co-worker go in and provide information about the behavioral change. And then at the level 4, at the results level, you're looking at key indicators here, key performance indicators. You're looking at financial changes, operational target changes, any number of things that you would be measuring that would tell you whether or not there was actually a financial or operational impact or result. In recent years, we've talked about a level 5 for Kirkpatrick. Essentially, this level is called return on investment, and it relates to most often a financial calculation or assessment of whether or not the training or program is having an impact. The issue is how do we calculate the ROI? So this new 5th level would essentially be looking at what was the financial benefit. Was there a payoff? And that's typically how you hear people talk about this. So level 1, you're looking for the smiles. Level 2, you're looking for the learning. Level 3, did behavior change? Level 4, can you see a result or an impact? And then level 5, can you actually assess a financial benefit? This focus on this level 5, or this modification to Kirkpatrick, is essentially a justification, if you will. Was the cost that we put into this, was it worth it? And so Jack Phillips of the ROI Institute came up with a model that we'll cover that really was trying to get to, okay, how do we get to measure specifically? He would actually say, I think if you ask him, he would actually say the results level doesn't really matter because it has to be done and you want it to be engaging. But what you really are trying to measure with return on investment is, was there a transfer of knowledge? Did people get better skills and knowledge? And did the organization change, or was there impact based on the training they were provided? And while we're talking about the return on investment of training, the ROI method can be applied to a lot of things. Here's just a small list. Customer service, leadership development, your onboarding process, how well your IT department implemented an ERP. You can look at how people experience the reorganization. Was it worth the cost, if you will? Even how well you manage your local high school soccer team, or whether or not attending a conference was worth the money that your employer paid. So at its core, return on investment is just your profit or your benefit over costs times 100, and that equals your percent. So if I were looking at a training program, that program I determined based on some calculation that I was getting $50,000 benefit. Or let's say that because I had hired a certain number of, or it cost me a certain amount of money to hire an employee. Well, if I hire an employee for that, it earns $100,000 a year, but it costs me $150 to recruit a new employee. That's an increase of 50%. So that would mean that my benefit in this case would be $150,000. Well, if it costs me $150,000 to attract someone that I'm going to be paying $50,000, that means it's costing me 1.5 times that salary every time I want to recruit a new person. So if I can come up with a training program that allows me to save that $50,000, then I'm in a better place to, I can invest that money in something else as opposed to wasting it on a process. So maybe I invest in my retention. So take a moment to pause the video and look at the ROI process according to Dr. Phillips at the ROI Institute. There's an evaluation and planning phase. There's a data collection phase, which is where most of you will be involved. And you can see that's where your level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 analysis would take place, or the collection of the data would take place. But in order to get to ROI, you have to go a little bit beyond your basic analysis, and you have to look at, isolate the effects of the benefit of the program that you have. What are the hopefully benefits, and then now can we convert that to some kind of monetary data? Can we put a dollar on that benefit? Not only do we think it was good or we felt good about it, but what kind of dollar amount can you put on that? And that's usually the biggest change. But that's the only way you can get to calculating a return on investment or a level 5 ROI. And then at that point, it's a matter of how do you communicate that ROI back to the people who are funding your training or your program. So in the Phillips ROI approach, it's really Kirkpatrick +1. We keep coming back to that. We talked about level 5 earlier, the adding of level 5 or return on investment. Dr. Phillips would say that we also add a level 0, which is input. And essentially what he would say is at 0, you're just counting. So most employers today, when they develop a training program, the first question they ask is not, well, how did the people like the training, or what did they learn, or what behavior was changed, or what was the result, or what was the ROI? They usually ask, how many people went to training? And this is an input level that, while it offers almost no contribution to measuring the effectiveness of training, it does signal to our funders that training has occurred. So the ROI method from the ROI Institute has this model. It's called the ROI V model or the V model. You can pause and just take a moment to look at it, but I'm going to deconstruct this in a very different way. So you can see at its basic impact, this V has Kirkpatrick's levels built into it: reaction, learning, application, impact, and ROI. But you also see some other things over here, right? So let me break it down slightly differently. So I'll start with the levels again. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Input, reaction, learning, application or behavior, impact, and ROI. So essentially, what are we evaluating? And at each level, what are we evaluating? Well, in order to do that, we have to come up with some type of objectives. So we come up with objectives at each level. At the input, it's the impact, input is the input objective. At reaction, reaction objectives, and so forth and so on. So you have learning objectives at each level for the program and the training. But where do we get these objectives, right? Do we just make them up and say, well, Kirkpatrick has this model, here's levels 1 through 3, 4. Phillips says add these other two levels, 0 and 5, and then we just make them up? No, we actually go through this process of identifying what the customer needs, what the objective, what's the business impact you're trying to create. So if we're starting with what the customer needs or what the impact we're trying to create, here's some questions we might want to ask. What is the problem we're trying to solve with training? Can it even be solved? If so, what would the payoff be? In relation to that, what business need will have to happen in order for us to get to that payoff or to solve that problem? What performance are we trying to address in order to meet that business need? What preferences, reactions, emotions do we desire from the training or program that will help us change performance and meet the business need and get to a point of payoff? And then the last question, what inputs do we need? What activity would occur? And so now that we've asked those questions of the customer, we actually start to look at that V in a different way. So we do an initial analysis where we identify what the payoff need is, what the business need is, what the performance need is, what the learning, preference, and input needs are, and how would this help us align to our organization. This has to occur within an initial interview or initial discussion with the people in charge. So when you sit down with your client, you're asking those questions so that you can get to this point. You're trying to determine what the training or program is trying to change. So now that we know that, let's look at what the objectives should be. So we create SMART objectives, which I know you've already discussed, at each level. And then this rounds out the V model. So essentially, I start here asking the client, what are the payoff needs, business needs, performance needs, learning needs, what behaviors need to change, what are the preferences, what are the emotions, how do the people need to feel about this, and who's going to be involved. So I develop those objectives going up, and then I evaluate the effectiveness of the training by first, did people show up? Were they satisfied with the training? Did they learn anything? Did behavior change? Did the organization change? And can now I put a dollar amount to it? So here's an example of a project or training that was designed for leaders to help address absenteeism. So the payoff need is the organization has an absentee problem that costs them about $100,000 a month. What if I told you, any manager, I can save you $1,200,000 every year by this training occurred? Wow, that would be exciting. And so, all right, so what's the business need here? Well, because we have people who show up unexpectedly, it's costing us $100,000 a month. All right, so what does this mean for performance? Well, when I talk with supervisors about people not showing up and I measure their performance and I see these unplanned absences, that unexpected absenteeism costs us $100,000 per month. And so essentially you're working through the process. Well, what is the learning? Maybe we need to train managers on how to counsel people or provide them feedback about the importance of attending work. Maybe there's something else going on that we need to look at. And so it may be that I'm developing counseling skills. So I go in and I develop a project or a training on how we help leaders help employees make decisions and have better understanding around absenteeism. So again, freeze the video and take a look at the objectives. So I'm moving from reaction, it'll be received favorably by people, to learning. I'm going to help them understand the acquisition of dialogue skills, communication skills, counseling skills, and then make sure that they're demonstrated. I'm now going to perhaps observe that manager after they've received that training, and I'm going to notice a change, hopefully, in absenteeism. And then at this point, as I look at impact on the organization, I now see that there's, just in 10 months, we've had some kind of impact on the organization in a positive way. And now at the end of the year, I look and would you notice I'm not spending $100,000, I'm only spending about $75,000 per month. So perhaps I do this training again and again and again, and I reinforce the learning, and I get to a point where I can now evaluate it from reaction to learning to application or behavior to impact to ROI. So the V model starts here with what is the organizational need, and it ends with what's the financial impact. I identify the business need and I measure the impact of absenteeism. The job performance, discussing with employees, counseling, having specific objectives, and now I measure whether or not that had an impact. And so you end up again with the graphic that Jack Phillips has put out through the ROI Institute of what analysis and measurement looks like in the V model. This is a model of a consulting approach using the V model, where essentially you begin your contracting process. You go through an initial interview with the client to collect this data. You might use something like ADDIE to develop a model of instructional design. Then you would work through the V model, and then as you work back up, you're evaluating how effective the consulting was. You're looking at the cost benefit of your consulting services to deliver, and then you're having a closing meeting. So if you're in the MBA consulting class, you will see these other pieces where now the ROI has provided you a way to discuss what's going on. So if we, in the next few slides, you're going to be encouraged to stop and read through some narrative that will help you have a better understanding of the V model in this context. Remember to pause the video And when you're done, move forward. So how can the ROI method be used? Phillips has an approach he calls the Phillips calculator. You can go onto his website at www.roiinstitute.net, and you can actually see models for how to measure certain things. For instance, customer service, relevant indicators of the benefit. You can look at customer satisfaction surveys, customer complaints, customer response. You can even look at new sales, since there's a relationship there. For employee satisfaction, you can look at attitude surveys, employee grievances, union complaints. You can look at stress reduction. You can look at organizational commitment surveys. For employee withdrawal, you can look at things like employee return, absentee rate, transfer, tardiness, and retention metrics. For team effectiveness, you can measure the indicators would be like quick decisions, smooth communications, reduced conflict, and better cooperation. So if you want a simple step-by-step process to evaluation using the ROI model, here it is. Gather data before the training starts. Gather data after the training ends. And you might do it over time. Again, this would be more expensive, but you could do it this way. Immediately, 1 week, 1 month, and 6 months. And you can do this at all levels. Results, benefits, or I should say results, behavior, and ROI. Isolate the effects of the program. So maybe behavior did change, but are you sure it changed as related to the training you're doing, or was there other factors such as a worldwide pandemic or a pay increase that might have impacted the behavior? Extract the monetary benefit from the data. Add up all the program costs and then divide the benefit by the cost, multiply it by 100, and that's where you get your cost benefit and your ROI. Now, the last step is taking a look at other intangible benefits that you may have received from the training that you haven't measured yet. This will be the most challenging part because sometimes it's hard to convert the intangible value to a dollar amount. And as humans, we tend to exaggerate the benefit, and so we have to be careful not to do that because if it proves that that benefit does not exist or does not exist in the way that you have shared, then you can get into credibility issues between you and the funder. For the next 7 slides, I want you to review them, pause your video, and review each and move forward to the next. Step 6 is really where you're calculating the ROI. You're taking the net benefit of the training or the program, and you're dividing that by the total cost of the program, and you're multiplying it by 100. So in the case here, we had a $290,000 benefit reduction in absenteeism over a year period. The cost of the training to train all the managers, prepare materials, etc., was $234,000. You multiply that by 100 and you get essentially 55,000 of benefit divided by 2 million of cost for a 23.457 return. And while that represents a nice return on investment, there could be other things, other intangibles that you haven't put a value to. But again, you want to be cautious not to overestimate what that is. And one way to do this is by using, again, the table of indicators. And for more information on the ROI method and Kirkpatrick, I would suggest the Phillip ROI model, the 5 levels of training, which is an evaluation on what a fix. You can also reach out to the ROI Institute at roiinstitute.net, and you can find all of Jack's books and all of his work and models, and you can find some really good evaluation templates that will help you make sure your training is successful. So thank you for your time. If you're interested in more regarding Kirkpatrick or ADDIE or the Phillips ROI, feel free to reach out to us at Workforce Systems at www.workforcesd.com. My name is Richard Ray, but any of our associates can help you. Thank you very much. Have a great day.